Welcome back to the Shepherd's Pie, a slice of hope to raise faithful kids. I'm Tony Kolenk, a law school professor, a writer with Practical Homeschooling Magazine, and author of the Harwood Mysteries series for teens. By the way, if you or a teen in your life are a fan of my series, for a limited time, I'm giving away a free short story on my website starring Lucy, one of the main girl characters in the series. On today's show, we'll be discussing what parents, teachers, youth ministers need to know about social media platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and even about influencers. My guest is Evan Barber. My guest today is Evan Barber, head of the content department for the Access guidebooks put out by Tyndale Kids. Since 2007, Access has helped hundreds of thousands of parents navigate conversations with their teens. Evan leads a team of folks whose goal is to leverage pop culture to help parents and other adults show teens how faith is relevant to every aspect of their lives. He is now a curriculum writer and producer for content on mental health, relationships, social media, spiritual formation, all sorts of great topics. And he lives in Colorado with his wife. Evan, welcome to the show.
Tony, thanks so much for having me.
It sounds like you must have had a lot of fun traveling around with Access and dealing with young people and kind of
Mm.
learning about all these issues. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that type of work.
So, when I was in college, I was a journalist for a couple of kind of pop culture newspaper publication, magazine kind of things, interviewing musicians and artists and that kind of thing. And also taking classes in philosophy and theology and English lit. And I met the founder of Access, and he described Access as basically what you would get if C.S. Lewis and MTV had a baby. Nobody really cares about MTV anymore, so that's not the way that we would probably phrase it today. But it struck me that this organization was in many ways kind of the perfect fusion of the sort of theological, philosophical pursuits that I valued so much with the sort of pop culture analyzing and trying to understand trends in music, trends in art, trends in movies and TV shows and that kind of thing. And it just seemed like this beautiful marriage of things that I didn't really think would fit together necessarily, very naturally. And so I came on initially as an intern, and I was on a public speaking team. There were teams of 2 men and 2 women. We would go into high schools, we would go to youth groups, we would go to summer camps, we would go to conferences, all these kinds of places, do presentations that were really interactive and had a lot of breakout conversation times built into them, that kind of thing, with teenagers. And it was a really cool experience. It was a really cool opportunity. Traveled all over the country for a while. I just kind of said that I lived in America in general because we were just on the road all the time. One of the things that we realized over time is that the parents and the caring adults who were on the ground with these teens in those various places were really in a much more strategic position to make a lasting impact on the next generation. So we really shifted our emphasis as an organization toward equipping parents and teachers and other caring adults. We started releasing digital resources that were designed to equip parents to be able to keep up with and disciple the next generation. And now we have hundreds of written audio and video resources helping to do just that.
Now, I'll be honest, I just have entered into the TikTok foray myself recently.
Yeah.
As an older person, if you want to call me that,
Mm,
that was one of the social media platforms I shied away from. But
yeah.
I see you've got separate guides here, one for TikTok, one for YouTube, one for Instagram,
Mm.
one that's labeled Teen FOMO, and maybe start with that one. What is
Mm.
that?
FOMO, or the fear of missing out, unpacks the immense pressure that the fear of missing out can exert on teens' lives. To a certain extent, FOMO has been a thing that people have wrestled with for a long time. C.S. Lewis wrote a short piece called The Inner Ring that we quote near the beginning of this parent guide. And it's about that very thing, this desire to be a part of an inner ring and to not be missing out on the greatest connections that are possible. But of course, in an era of smartphones and social media, that fear can be greatly exacerbated. I think part of why FOMO has become such a major factor in life today is because we live in a culture that in many ways promises endless opportunities for our pleasure and our gratification. And I think with all of this availability, it's possible to begin to think that life is fundamentally about maximizing our own gratification. And I think when we think that that's what life is about, it's easy to become very nervous about the possibility that we could be more satisfied or more fulfilled somewhere else, at some other party, in some other relationship, in some other town, maybe in some other faith, or whatever it might be. In terms of dealing with it, one of the things, again, that I think is worth recognizing is just the extent to which FOMO can be fed by social media. Every time I take a break from social media, I always imagine that I'm going to really wonder and worry about what all I'm missing out on. But I always deal with way less FOMO when I'm taking a break. And that makes sense because a lot of the content that's featured on social media is around what we missed out on, right? I think social media, it'll affect different people in different ways. There's an invitation to practice self-awareness, and to really kind of dig into and ask the teens in our lives, when you use these apps, like, how do you feel afterward? Do you feel good? And is it primarily a positive experience for you? And just kind of let them sort that out a little bit.
What's a parent or a teacher supposed to think of FOMO at this point? What are they supposed to tell teens, or how do they handle FOMO with their teen?
I think part of it is going to be an invitation for the parent, the teacher, whoever it is, to maybe work through some of their own FOMO in a way. I think one of the things that we talk a lot about at Axis is that we have to get to the point where we can model the habits of life and habits of mind and habits of being that we want to see the next generation developing. I honestly think that's a big part of it. There was a book called The Paradox of Choice that was written by a guy named Barry Schwartz a couple years ago. And in it, he talks about how this temptation to relentlessly check our decisions against other options can allow us to actually make objectively better decisions. He uses the example of buying the best possible pair of pants that you can buy. But at the same time, when we've gotten so used to relentlessly checking our decisions against other possible options, most people, even if they're making an objectively better decision, feel subjectively worse about whatever the decision was, because there's such a consciousness of what we're missing out on. So one of the things he talks about that I think is very interesting is the importance of learning to accept the good enough option and not necessarily feeling like we have to have the best option, because in that quest to get the best, whatever it is, we never truly know whether what we've chosen is the best. Obviously, that's extremely countercultural and can be very difficult to implement. One more quick thing that I would say, science has really shown that gratitude can dispel fear and anxiety. I think about that verse. I think it's in First Thessalonians. That's like, in everything, give thanks. I can remember being a teenager and feeling very angsty and very cynical and very frustrated and just feeling like giving thanks is really the last thing that I want to do in a lot of situations. But I think it's very important that science is demonstrating that things like gratitude journaling can really make a profound brain shift happen. Taking time to appreciate whatever good things we have going on in our life can loosen the grip of FOMO on our minds and on our hearts overall.
Yeah, I guess, like they say, the perfect is the enemy of the good sometimes,
Mm.
and that seems to be what you're touching on there. And it's funny because as you're talking about this, I'm thinking of all of the ways that I still need to grow in those areas myself. I can't tell you how many times I try to avoid a traffic jam by looking at my GPS app, and I
Yeah.
wind up spending more time trying to get around the traffic jam than if I had just said, you know what, I'm just going to sit in the traffic for a little while.
Right, right. Absolutely. And I think that's a very common just reality, for people today. And it really requires going against the grain to not be relentlessly plagued with dissatisfaction for whatever our situation is. But
So you've got three guides here in the series
mm,
specifically for different social
mhm,
platforms: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
mm.
Maybe kind of run us through what you do in those guides for those different platforms.
Each of those guides, Parents Guide to TikTok, Parents Guide to YouTube, and Parents Guide to Instagram, are really designed to be kind of everything a parent needs to know about these apps in order to have an informed conversation about them. Each of them plays its own role in the social media landscape today. YouTube is arguably the biggest social media app, but it's also kind of just like a billion highly customized TV channels with comment sections attached. So talking about YouTube kind of ends up being like talking about the entire internet. Basically, whatever you want to watch on YouTube, you can watch. If you want to watch something educational, you can do that. If you want to watch something that's just dumb comedy, you can do that. Anything that you can think of is pretty much going to be on there. And one of the things we talk about in that guide is just with the massive quantity of all of that, dialogue is going to be probably the most important thing. Asking your teen, what channels do you currently subscribe to? What are you paying attention to? What do you like about those channels? That kind of thing is going to be the best way to get a window in on what that experience is like for the young men and women that we're caring for. TikTok is arguably the biggest strictly social media app for Gen Z right now. Although there are new apps coming out all the time, TikTok is a place to try to get famous. It's a news source. It's a place to look up restaurants. It's a place to talk about politics. It's a place to talk about fashion, to keep up with friends, to find new music, to buy tickets. And in a lot of people's minds, it's kind of being seen like an oracle as well in some ways. One of the things that's, I'm sure you've been experiencing lately, is unique to that app is that when you log in, it just kind of dumps you straight into some piece of content from somebody completely random, which somehow the app has determined will matter to you, right? So it doesn't start you off in a feed or a menu. It's just like, here's some content as soon as you're in. There are some interesting theories around why does this thing appear in my feed. A lot of people end up feeling like TikTok maybe knows me better than I know myself. I saw one article that said TikTok knew I was gay before I did. And there are a lot of articles that ascribe this deep sense of meaning to like which videos are chosen for you, in that it's called the For You page. And in reality, what the app is really trying to do is predict what videos you will like based on what videos you've looked at previously. But it's unpredictable enough that people kind of wonder what's going on with that. Instagram is still a huge app and it's worth understanding, but I think to a lot of teens, it's losing some favor because of how home feeds are just really full of ads. Their parent company kind of deliberately concealed some of their own research that was talking about how it was kind of proving that Instagram was having like an objectively negative effect on teens' mental health, which is not news, right? I mean, we've known that for many years, but there was some internal research that was kind of suppressed. And then it just keeps trying to rip every other app off, honestly. I mean, it took stories from Snapchat. It created something called the IG Candid Challenge, which rips off the app Be Real. And there are all kinds of other things like that. I think the ones who still care about the app are kind of like, hey, just Instagram, just like be yourself, I think across all of these, there are similar benefits, similar drawbacks. Some of the positives are they all create an opportunity for self-expression. They all create an opportunity for community, but there are opportunities for FOMO, for bullying, for exposure to sexual content, things like that that are important to be aware of, no matter what social media platform we're talking about.
Yeah, so let's just unpack that for a few minutes, because that is probably, of course, as a parent, how is this going to hurt my kid? Or, on the opposite end, well, how is this good for my kid? Maybe there's some positive things about these. And I don't know, again, if it's possible to sort of uniquely distinguish between these three that you've just been talking about. But what do you think? Some of the good and some of the bad in each of them?
There was a really interesting study that came out a couple of years ago, and it was contrasting the various positive and negative effects on mental health and on things like that these different apps will have. Unfortunately, the study came out before TikTok was really very big, so it wasn't included in the breakdown. Basically, the only app that had kind of a net positive result for users was YouTube. And they credited the fact that there is the opportunity, kind of like I was saying, for self-expression. There are communities that can be built there. Comment sections, there was a sense in the survey that the comment sections of YouTube tend to be a little more positive and encouraging than the other apps that they were contrasting with. And at that time, they were mainly looking at Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. And they kind of put Instagram as really kind of a net negative in terms of the overall effect that it has on users' mental health. And obviously, there are ways that can be mitigated, right? There are screen time restrictions that can be put into place. Instagram just rolled out this feature that allows people to block certain keywords that they don't want to come across in their browsing. Who we follow can make a huge difference. I mean, two people on Instagram can have completely different experiences of the app based on who they're following and on the kind of content that they're consuming and probably the length of time that they're spending consuming that sort of content. These kinds of generalizations become tricky, I think, for a parent or a caring adult who has a teen in their life who they care about, who really is interested in one of these social media apps. These are the kinds of conversations that can become more important. What are the accounts that you're following? What are the channels that you're following? Obviously, with TikTok, that becomes a little bit harder to do given the For You page that I mentioned that just kind of generates random content for you. I think there can still be a conversation even there around what is your experience of TikTok like? Do you come away feeling encouraged, uplifted generally, or do you feel a little bit bummed out afterward, or what is that like? I think trying to customize the conversation as much as possible to the individual teen. And that's really I think I said it at the beginning, but that's really one of the main goals of these parent guides is to just give whoever's reading enough information to be able to ask informed, intentional, purposeful questions about the various influences and accounts that the next generation is paying attention to.
I mean, of course, you haven't even mentioned Facebook, which I know a lot of Gen Z just figures is for boomers and they don't want anything to do with it. And I thought Instagram might be getting like that too.
Yeah.
But I've been around some teenagers in my life in the last few years. What I've noticed is TikTok and YouTube seem to be what they're doing. And I don't see them commenting. It seems to me that they're just rolling like in an addictive fashion, just laughing and giggling at one silly video after another. Maybe can you address their concerns with sort of getting addicted to those kinds of platforms or scrolling? And what are parents supposed to do about that type of situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I think is important to recognize in that conversation is that these apps are absolutely designed to maximize addiction. One of the quotes that I really love is from a woman named Dr. Sherry Turkle. She worked at MIT for a while and since then has kind of become kind of a tech critic and thinker in a lot of ways. She has this insight. She says, if we feel addicted to our phones, it is not a personal weakness. We are exhibiting a predictable response to a perfectly executed design. Looking at things through this lens might put us halfway to making new choices and needed changes. And I think that's such a great perspective. And I think one of the things that it allows for is a sense of empathy with the teen or whoever it is that really does feel extremely addicted to whatever app we're talking about, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or something like that. Mitigating that can be a little complicated at times, especially if the teen doesn't care and they feel like there's nothing better that could be done with that time. One of the resources that I would love to kind of plug is there's an organization called the Center for Humane Technology. They had a movie on Netflix recently called The Social Dilemma. Came out a couple years ago. It was kind of unpacking some of the ways that these apps are deliberately designed to hijack our attention and foster addiction and that kind of thing. And they have this whole list of really practical small tweaks that can be made to help lessen the effect of addiction, compulsive use, compulsive scrolling, that kind of thing. And so I would definitely recommend that, the Center for Humane Technology.
Moving on to your last guidebook, actually, it's to me maybe the most intriguing because it's about influencers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know as an author, we hear advice like, yeah, influencers, you want to get your books in the hands of influencers because they're going to talk about them, or little girl's going to go crying on the internet and then everybody will buy your book. So
Right.
what do parents need to know about influencers?
I think for the rising generation, influencers are the new celebrities in many ways. In a lot of ways, Gen Z trusts influencers way more than traditional celebrities. They seem more relatable, they seem more trustworthy. And kind of a key difference that we use in the parent guide is basically celebrities are people who achieve stardom for something they do offline, right? Whether that's acting, sports, politics, music, that kind of thing. Whereas influencers become famous for their online presence. Their fame is entirely dependent on and built by their social media presence. The relatability aspect can get interesting when those influencers start doing product placements and that kind of thing. It could maybe seem like a much more effective marketing strategy, and there's been a lot of controversy around that. But I think for a lot of Gen Z, one of the main conversations to have around this topic of influencers is how compelling is this to you as a career option or as a career possibility? I think for a lot of teens, they see influencers as having the kind of role that they would love to have. They would love to get paid to upload videos on social media and maintain an online presence and that kind of thing. And so one of the things that we talk about in the parent guide is some of the stories that influencers have shared about the level of exhaustion that can kind of entail, right? With trying to maintain this public persona, this sort of online brand. It can really become kind of a 24/7 job. And so we try to help put a little context around the appeal for that.
So it sounds like these guidebooks have a lot of factual information and some advice that would be valuable. If my listeners are interested in getting their hands on them, where is the best place to go to get them?
Yeah. The first 5, these that we've been talking about on social media, will be in stores, available anywhere books are sold. And there will be a few more guides that we'll release in a sequence over the next several months, but this is the first batch.
And what if they want to just learn more about you? Do you kind of have your own website, or are you specifically just featured on Access?
Yeah, I'm a part of Access, so I would direct them there. Access.org is where our stuff is hosted.
Excellent. All right. So just kind of wrapping up then, what's your best bit of advice, for parents or teachers to deal with teens and social media today?
I think anyone whose job or role it is to love and shepherd the next generation should familiarize themselves with whatever apps the next generation is using. And a lot of the time, I think that's going to involve downloading them yourself, maybe making a profile, figuring out what it's like to be on that app, which you've been doing. And maybe you'll be able to communicate with the teens through that app. Maybe not, but even if they don't feel excited about messaging you through that platform, you'll be able to understand a really significant part of their lives through doing that.
Excellent advice. All right. And Evan, thank you so much for being on the show today, talking about these important platforms and what people need to know. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate the time.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the show today. So, again, we've been speaking with Evan Barber from Axis about what parents and teachers need to know about social media platforms such as TikTok and YouTube. Again, this is Anthony Barone Kolenc. If you have a question for me or a topic you want me to cover on the show, please drop me a line on my website at anthonykolenc.com, where you can also learn more about my teen fiction series, The Harwood Mysteries. Until next time, may God bless you and your families as we work together to raise faithful kids.